The drive home from the clinic was just brutal. It was 5 in the evening and the Texas heat was doing that thing where the highway looks all wavy. I had the 8 cranked in my Honda, listening to some true crime podcast, but I wasn't even processing it. Traffic back toward the suburbs was just a nightmare, nothing but white SUVs. And those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every single lawn looks exactly the same. Pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a few. I think I forgot to buy milk, which is just great, because I knew I'd realize it the second. I wanted cereal tomorrow. Our house is basically a beige box with high ceilings and granite counters. The Hoa even emailed me a few weeks ago because my potted ferns were leaning too far over the sidewalk. I just stared at the garage door for a while before I could actually bring myself to get out. Work had been a total disaster. Im and I are ends, so my whole day is basically just fighting with insurance companies and dealing with patients who scream if you even look at them with a needle. 10 hours of managing everyone else's stress. I'm the one who knows every allergy and who needs their hand held during a biopsy. I basically keep the clinic running, but the doctors, they barely look at me. I am basically just a glorified secretary with a nursing degree. When I walked inside, it was dead quiet. Mark wasn't home, probably still at the office or at the gym. He's been really into his physique since he hit 35. I dropped my keys on the table and went to the kitchen for some water. I saw a smudge on the fridge, so I grabbed a cloth and wiped it. Then I saw another one. I ended up spending 5 minutes just scrubbing the thing until I could see my reflection. I looked like a ghost, just completely drained. I've spent 12 years building this life. I moved for Mark's job, helped him through his MBA, and handled every single thing at home. I'm the one who knows where the passports are, when the vac filter needs to be changed, and which detergent he likes. I just did it all. I went into the living room and just sat on the edge of the sofa. I started thinking about this trip we took to the coast. Maybe October? I can't even remember the year. We stayed at this little BB and we actually talked. Like really talked. Now it's just logistics. Did you pay the water bill? Who's getting the dry cleaning? That's it. I felt like I was just part of the furniture. Not in a dramatic way, it was just true. I'd be standing right there, and Mark would start talking as if it already left the room, or he'd ask where something was while I was literally holding it. Anyway, I decided to tackle the hall closet. I don't know why, I just felt like I had to move something. I started pulling out the winter coats from the plastic bins. While I was digging around, the sliding track on the shoe rack started sticking again. It's been doing that for months and it drives me crazy. I spent 10 minutes trying to force it open, just cursing under my breath. We paid $3,000 for custom shelving, and the thing can't even slide 2 inches to the left. I eventually just gave up and shoved the whole thing aside with a thud. Once the shoes were out of the way, I saw a gap in the shelving, right behind some old suitcases. There was something tucked back there where the vacuum doesn't reach. I reached in and pulled out a small, black leather briefcase. It wasn't one of Mark's usual work. Bags hose are way bigger and stay in his office. This one was older and scuffed. It had a combination lock on it. I just stared at it. I'd never seen it before. Mark doesn't really do secret bags. I thought maybe it was something from his dad's estate that he forgot about. But I had this feeling in my chest. I'd been ignoring things for months, the late nights, the way he'd tilt his phone away from me. All these networking events in cities he used to hate. I tried the lock. I tried 000 zoo, then our anniversary, his birthday, my birthday, nothing. I just sat there on the closet floor with the bag in my lap. The house was quiet, but it felt weird. Like something was about to happen. I thought about how ID basically pushed my own goals aside for him. I took a part-time clinic job instead of a management role at the hospital because it was better for the family. I just became the person who supported everything he did. I tried one more combination, the date we bought the house. The lock clicked. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there, heart pounding, smelling old leather and something kind of chemical. I opened the lid. It wasn't money. There was a stack of photos, a burner phone from like 2012, and a small notebook. I looked at the photos first, just standard 4x6 prints from a sieves. The first one was a woman. She wasn't a model or anything, but she was pretty. Dark hair, looking really happy in front of some cafe. The second photo was the same woman, and Mark had his arm around her. He was looking at her with this look. I haven't seen him look at me like that in 10 years. He looked obsessed. I just stared at the photo. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I looked at my stupid beige living room and felt like I was going to throw up. I picked up the notebook and flipped through it. There were dates, addresses, names. It wasn't just a fling. He had a whole second life, and he documented it with the same kind of organization I use for our bills. Then I heard the garage door open. Mark was home. The garage door opened, and I stood there for a minute, for a second, or maybe a minute. I was still on the floor in the hall closet, with the briefcase open in front of me and those photos right there. I could hear Mark humming. He does that when he's trying to act like everything's fine. And then I heard his bag hit the bench in the entryway. Live you home. He sounded normal. That's the part that actually made me feel sick. He sounded like a guy would had a long day at work and wanted to know what was for dinner. I didn't say anything. I kept looking at that photo of the woman. She was laughing, and the way Mark was looking at her, it didn't look like some random fling. He looked obsessed. Olivia. Then he was right there in the doorway. He still had his dress shirt on, sleeves rolled up, looking like he just came from the office. He stopped when he saw me. Then he saw the briefcase. For a second, he didn't have any expression. It was weird. Then he leaned against the doorframe and sighed. One of those long sighs, like I was the one being a pain. Where'd you find that? He asked. In the closet, I said. I don't know why I sounded so quiet behind the suitcases. He didn't come over to me. He stayed in the doorway, kind of blocking the way. I forgot that was even in there. Honestly, Liv, that's old news. Why are you digging through the back of the closet? Old news? I held up the photo. Who is she, Mark? He finally stepped into the room, but he didn't try to take the photos. He looked down at me with that face he makes, the one he uses when he thinks someone is being stupid. That was a long time ago, before we were even serious. I was going through some stuff back then, and I kept those to remind myself of who I didn't want to be. I looked at the book. There are dates in here, and addresses. Some of these don't look that old. Mark looked at it, and I think I saw him panic for a split second, but it went away fast. He looked frustrated and reached down and took the book from me. He wasn't aggressive, but he was firm. You're making things up, he said. These are work notes, client lists, old leads. Are you seriously sitting on the floor of a closet spying on me? Olivia, you're spiraling. This is actually embarrassing. I stared at him. And then it happened. Ah, how the conversation shifted to me spiraling instead of what he actually did. He's so smooth that, for a second, I wondered if I was the one acting crazy. I thought about the 12 years I'd spent running his entire life, making sure everything was perfect. I guess it stopped paying attention to myself, not imagining the photos. Mark, photos from 10 years ago, he said, and his voice got that sharp lecturing tone. If you're gonna snoop, at least find something recent. Just get a grip. I thought you trusted me. He didn't even wait for me to answer. He turned around and walked toward the kitchen. Going to go change. Maybe you should get up and think about why you felt the need to go digging in the closets. I sat there on the floor for God knows how long. It was quiet, except for the dishwasher. I looked at the empty spot where the briefcase had been, and then I figured it out. Dinner was super awkward. We had chicken and steamed broccoli, and we talked about the HOA meeting on Tuesday. Wait, was it Tuesday? No, it was Wednesday. He told about some problem with a vendor at work. He acted like the closet thing had never happened. He even squeezed my hand across the table, but it didn't feel like he loved me. It felt like he was just checking in. I played along, I nodded. I asked him about the gym. I knew if I started a fight, he'd just call me hysterical. I'd be the crazy one again. I remember a Tuesday or maybe Wednesday back in November. We had a fight about him staying late at the office, and somehow, by the end of the night, I was the one apologizing to him. I remember that feeling. It sucked. I decided I wasn't doing that again. After he fell asleep, I waited. I listened to him breathing through the wall. Once I was sure he was out, I crept into his office. The office is the only room that's really his. Smells like his cologne. I went straight for the desk. I started looking through the top drawer, but then I got distracted by his pen organizer. Mark is obsessed with his pens. He has them sorted by ink and tip size in these plastic trays. One of the trays was cracked, and a few pens had rolled into the corner. I spent a few minutes trying to fish them out with a paper clip, and I got really annoyed that he makes six figures but won't buy a new plastic tray. It's a cheap piece of acrylic, and it's practically falling apart. I honestly don't understand how someone can be so meticulous about ink flow, but ignore a physical crack in the plastic right in front of them. It was a stupid thing to be mad about, but I couldn't help it. Anyway, I moved the organizer and found a small leather ledger under some folders. I took it to the kitchen because the light was better. I didn't want to be caught in the office if he woke up. I opened it and started looking at the numbers. Mark always handled the big picture money. I did the day-to-day stuff: groceries, utilities, the kids' college funds, insurance. We had a joint account, and he had his 401k. I trusted him with the investments because he had the MBA, but looking at the ledger, things didn't add up. There were regular transfers: 500 here, 1,000, they're going to an account I'd never seen. It was a credit union in a town about 2 hours away, near the coast. I got this weird feeling. I went to the laptop in the kitchen and tried to log into our joint bank portal. I spent an hour scrolling back through 3 years of statements, trying to make sense of it. I spent the next 4 hours looking through everything. I found the pattern. He'd been siphoning money. It wasn't a huge amount each month, so I never noticed, but over 3 years it added up. He had almost $60,000 in a secret account. The dates matched the networking events he traveled to, the trips to the coast, the weekends he said he was with college friends. I sat back in the kitchen chair. I thought about the promotion I turned down at the hospital because Mark didn't want a dual-career household. He said he wanted me to handle the house, that my stability was what let him take risks. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a housekeeper he could sleep with, so he could do whatever he wanted. I did everything for him, and he's out here doing this? It was almost 3 in the morning. Mark was still asleep, probably dreaming about wherever that money was going. I didn't want to wake him up and scream. I didn't want to see that pitying look on his face again. I was angry, but I wasn't screaming. I was just done. I opened a new tab and searched for divorce attorneys in Dallas. I didn't click on any of them. I just looked at the names. I realized I didn't even know how to be on my own. I'd spent so long taking care of him that I didn't know who I was when I wasn't solving a problem for Mark. I realized I haven't bought myself a single thing that wasn't for the house or the kids like 3 years. I closed the laptop and stood up. I went to the sink and started washing the dinner dishes I'd left soaking. I scrubbed the plates thinking about the woman in the photo. I wondered if she knew about the hopa and the way he likes his pens organized. I wondered if she was just another part of a game he was playing, or if she was the only thing he actually liked. When I was done, I dried my hands and went back to the bedroom. I climbed into bed and lay there. Mark shifted in his sleep and put his arm across my waist, pulling me closer. I didn't move. I lay there in the dark and started making a list of every account I need to empty before he notices. He's not taking another cent. It was one of those bright Texas mornings where everything looks way better than it actually is. I woke up before Mark, which is pretty much the norm. I've been the first one up for years: coffee, packing lunches, just trying to get ahead of the chaos. But this morning, I just felt off. I lay there for a while watching the ceiling fan spin, with Mark's arm still draped across my waist. He was snoring. He had no idea I'd spent the last 4 hours basically auditing his lies. I slid out from under him carefully. He groaned and shifted, but stayed asleep. In the bathroom, I splashed some cold water on my face. I didn't even want to look in the mirror. Knew I looked like a wreck with huge bags under my eyes. I just stared at the bath mat. It has this frayed edge I've been meaning to trim for months, and honestly, the way it bunches up near the door is just irritating. I keep tripping on it, and I can't remember if I bought the cheap one or the expensive one, probably the cheap one. The first few hours were kind of a blur. I made the coffee. I got this annoying email from the hookah about some neighbor using the wrong shade of mulchap. Apparently, it was too reddish for the guidelines, and I just deleted it. I was just going through the motions, but my brain was stuck on that notebook, Nora K. Lee, that was the name in the ledger. Sometimes there was a dollar amount next to it, sometimes just a date, Nora K. Lee. It sounds like a name from a storybook or something. not the kind of name you expect to find while your 12-year marriage is falling apart. Once the house was empty and Mark left for his morning strategy meeting, I went back to the kitchen. I didn't even go into the office. I just sat at the island with my laptop and a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. I started with a basic Google search, nothing. Nora K. Lee is a common name, so I got a bunch of random results: a realtor in Oregon, a dental hygienist in Florida. For a second, I actually felt a bit of hope. I thought maybe I'd just misread the handwriting. But then I remembered the photos, the woman with the dark hair, and that laugh that took up the whole picture. I tried searching for her in the towns Mark had visited. I looked for Nora Lee in those coastal towns, matching them up with the dates in the ledger. LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I felt like I was in one of those true crime podcasts I listened to in the car, but without the narrator telling me I was getting close. It was just me, the sound of the fridge humming, and this knot in my stomach. I must have clicked through 5 different Nora Lees before I almost gave up. Wait, was it 5? Maybe 6. I lost count. Then I found a public Instagram. It wasn't a huge account, just a few hundred followers, but the profile picture was her, Nora K. Lee. When I clicked on it, my heart started racing, like actually pounding in my throat. Her feed looked like one long vacation. She was an interior designer in a small town about 2 hours south, lots of mid-century furniture, linen curtains, soft lighting. She posted about pottery classes and wine tastings and walks on the beach, and then I saw it. In the background of a photo from last September, there was a man's hand on her shoulder. He was wearing that expensive watch the one Mark bought himself for his 40th. I kept scrolling, and it just hit me in waves. Photos of them at some bistro I've never been to. A caption that said, "The only place where time actually slows down," with a heart. Then a photo of a little cottage which is probably where the secret money was going, with a caption about building a sanctuary. A sanctuary. I looked around my kitchen. The giant island, the stainless steel, the beige walls. I'd spent 10 years building a home for Mark. I did everything to fit his taste, to make sure he looked successful. I handled the renovations, the landscaping, all of it. I made this house a reflection of him, and the whole time he was paying for a little getaway for someone else. I felt sick. I stood up to get a glass of water from the pantry, and I noticed the sliding door of the spice rack had come off its hinge again. I tried to push it back in, but the plastic groove is just stripped. I spent 5 minutes fighting with it, just pressing down with my palm, getting so frustrated that this luxury cabinetry we paid a premium for was basically falling apart. I don't even know why we went with this brand. I ended up just shoving a box of cinnamon on top of it to keep it from sliding open. I stood there, staring at the cinnamon, wondering why I was so angry about a spice rack when my entire life was a lie. I went back to the laptop. I wanted everything. I spent the next 3 hours digging. I found her website and her business address. She had a small studio in a house shed renovated herself. The more I looked, the more I realized Nora wasn't just a mistress. She was like a version of me that Mark had edited. She did the things I used to love before I became a full-time support system. She painted. She traveled. She had this airy quality to her life. Mark hadn't just cheated with a woman, he cheated with a lifestyle. He wanted the stability of the iron wife, who handled the 401k and the kids' schedules, but he wanted the excitement of the artist in the cottage. He wanted both, and he used my hard work to pay for the other one. I remember around mid-July of last year, no, it might have been August, Mark seemed different. He was actually attentive for a few weeks, bringing me flowers, telling me he appreciated me. At the time, I thought we were finally getting somewhere. Now I know those flowers were just guilt payments. He was probably coming off a weekend at that cottage, feeling bad that he had to go back to the beige box. I wasn't even crying at that point. I don't even know how to describe it, just completely done. I started thinking about all the times ID apologized for spiraling, all the times he told me I was being too sensitive, or that I needed to get a grip. He'd spent years making me feel like my intuition was just a malfunction so he could keep a black leather briefcase in the hall closet. I opened a spreadsheet. I didn't look for lawyers yet, I just started a list. I listed every joint asset, savings, brokerage accounts, the equity in the house. I looked up the market value of our home and calculated how much that secret fund had cost him over 3 years. 60,000 was just the start. There were credit card charges I hadn't seen travel. Probably more. I spent the afternoon doing math. I spent the whole time staring at a screen, realizing I've been a complete idiot for 3 years. Around 4, my mother called. Liv, honey, are you coming over for Sunday dinner? I'm making that pot roast you like. I just stared at the phone. My mom loves Mark. She thinks he's the rock of the family. She always tells me how lucky I am to have a husband who's so driven. I don't know, Mom, I said. My voice sounded weird. I might be busy. Busy? On a Sunday? What could you possibly be doing? I'm just catching up on some things. Let me know. Your father wants to talk to Mark about that investment thing. I hung up and just sat there. I felt really isolated. Everyone saw the version of me Mark created, the reliable, tired nurse who keeps everything running. They saw the furniture. They didn't see the woman calculating how to strip a man of every cent he owned. I went to the bedroom and looked at the closet. The briefcase was gone, had taken it to the office or hidden it after that first fight. But he forgot one thing. In the one who handles the digital archives, Mark is a man of habit. He uses the same password for almost everything, usually a version of the dog's name, and the year he finished his MBA. He thinks he's clever by changing one number, but I'm the one who resets his passwords every time he forgets them. I sat down and logged into his primary email. I didn't search for Nora first. I searched for account, transfer, and lease. I found emails between Mark and a property manager in the coastal town. The cottage wasn't a rental. He'd put a down payment on it. He used a shell company called JMB Holdings to hide it. But the paperwork was right there in his sent folder. He wasn't just visiting a mistress, he was building a second home. He had a whole other life, a whole other set of keys. And in those emails, he wasn't the stern husband who told me I was spiraling. He was affectionate, playful. He was the man I fell in love with 12 years ago, the one who wrote me notes and took me on spontaneous drives. He took all that effort and tenderness and gave it to another woman. He left me with the logistics, the HOA emails, the broken spice racks, the 401k. A tear ran down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. I just watched it hit the keyboard. I wasn't crying over the marriage. I was crying over the waste of my own time. I gave the best years of my life to a man who viewed me as a utility. I spent the next hour downloading everything, every email, every bank statement. I saved them to a cloud drive he doesn't know exists. I organized the folders with the same care I use for our tax returns. By the time I heard his car in the driveway, I had a complete map of everything he'd done. I closed the laptop and went to the kitchen. I started making dinner. I chose something simple: tacos. Mark likes tacos. As I chopped the onions, I felt this strange sense of calm. The panic was gone. I knew who I was now. I wasn't the stable one or the predictable one. I was the one with the evidence. Mark walked in, humming some tune. He dropped his keys on the counter and wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, kissing my neck. Smells great in here. Live. Hard day. I leaned back into him, feeling his dress shirt against my skin. I thought about the cottage. Nora K. Lee. The $60,000 and the shell company. It was okay, I said. My voice was steady. Just a bit of cleaning. I finally got around to organizing some things. He chuckled, not really listening. Thanks for doing that, babe. I don't know what I'd do without you. I smiled, but I didn't look at him. I just kept chopping the onions, wondering how long it would take for him to realize that the stability he relied on was the thing that was going to destroy him. I put the meat in the pan and it started to sizzle. I realized I'd forgotten to buy sour cream, but for the first time in years I didn't care. I didn't feel the need to fix it, I just let the mistake be. Since September is brutal, that humid heat doesn't let go. I spent most of that month drifting through the house. I kept the AC at 68, which is probably why I was always shivering, but I felt like if I didn't I'd crash. I needed to stay awake for the first 2 weeks after I found the ledger and the emails. I didn't say a word. No screaming, no crying. I became the perfect wife. The most efficient version of myself Mark had ever seen. I pressed his shirts, handled the kids' soccer schedules, and asked about his day. It felt gross. Every time I had to smile at him, it was a struggle. It was actually kind of easy though. Spent 12 years fitting myself into whatever gaps he had in his life. so I already knew the part. I knew when to nod and how to look tired enough that he'd feel like the big provider. While he was loving how stable things were, I used every spare second to build a case. I didn't go to a lawyer near our house. I drove 40 minutes north to a little office in a plaza that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 90s. I didn't want to run into anyone from the HOA or some other parent from school. The lawyer was Sarah Vance. 50s, sharp glasses, and she had this way of looking at you where you could tell she was already figuring it all out. She didn't do the "I am so sorry" thing or offer me tissues when I told her about the secret account and the cottage. She took notes. She told me that since Texas is a community property state, basically anything earned during the marriage belongs to both people, including the money he'd been siphoning and whatever he bought with it. I remember staring at the white walls of her office. I didn't feel happy exactly, it felt right. She mentioned the shell company, Gem Holdings, and said it was a common move but not a magic shield. If he used our money to start it, I had a claim we had to prove where the money went. I gave her the flash drive, emails, bank statements, screenshots from Nora's Instagram. I had it all organized by Dame Nurse, so I'm paid to keep track of every tiny detail. I treated my marriage like a patient chart. Sarah looked through it for a while. She didn't say much, but she seemed impressed. She told me I'd done the heavy lifting. Most people come in with a feeling and some texts, but I had a forensic audit. I told her I'd spent a decade managing his life, so I knew where everything was. We talked about securing assets quietly before he knew there was a fight. She told me not to move any big chunks of money yet, because that would trigger a red flag, but she helped me open a separate account in my name at a different bank. When I got back to the car, I sat there for 20 minutes. It felt weird. I was planning to blow up my family, but at the same time I was wondering if I'd remembered to defrost the chicken for dinner. When I walked in, Mark was on his phone in the living room. He smiled at me. It was that same smile he'd used for years, the one that meant I was just part of the furniture. "Hey babe, how was your day?" "Fine," I said. I kissed his cheek. "Ran some errands, stopped by Target for the kids." "Great. Listen, I might be late Thursday. Potential client in Austin, so I might have to head down there for a night." I didn't even flinch. A month ago I would have asked a million questions, now I nodded. "Okay, want me to pack you a bag, or you got it?" He actually looked at me for a second. "You're actually being chill for once, Liv." "I like it, I feel like we're finally getting somewhere. I am trying to be more relaxed," I told him. I went into the kitchen to unload the dishwasher and noticed the AC was making that weird clicking sound again. It was a stupid little noise, but it bothered me. I stood there listening to it for a minute, then walked away. I didn't feel like dealing with it. The next week was exhausting. Every time he touched me or said he loved me, I felt nauseous. But I played along. I kept the house running while I dug for everything he'd hidden. I started organizing the home office more. Mark loved that because he hated clutter. While he was at work, I went through everything: tax returns, insurance policies. I made digital copies of everything. I found a few things I'd missed before: small life insurance policies, a retirement account he'd mentioned once but never gave me the login for. I think it was a Tuesday or maybe Wednesday. But I found a folder in the back of his cabinet with a deed for some land in a county. I didn't recognize it wasn't the cottage, but it was more. He'd been buying small parcels of land. He let me stress about the mortgage on our house while he was playing real estate mogul on the side. I once even sad I felt clear. I kept up the act in the neighborhood too. I went to the wine mixers. I talked to the other wives about landscaping and school board stuff. I listened to them complain about their husbands' hours. It felt like I was watching a movie. There was Nurse Olivia, helpful, overwhelmed, and then there was the real me, calculating the value of that land in the other county. One afternoon, I was at Target getting school supplies. The place was packed and the lines were ridiculous. I was at the self-checkout and the machine kept glitching. "Unexpected item in bagging area," the voice kept saying. I had a pack of glue sticks in the bag, but the sensor wasn't picking it up. I tried lifting them and putting them back, and then the machine froze. I stood there staring at the screen, and I felt this huge surge of rage, not even at the machine, but at the repetition of my whole life. 12 years of the same loop: wake up, coffee, house, husband, sleep. Repeat. The kid who came over to help me looked like he hated his life. He swiped his card, cleared the error, and didn't even look at me. I stood there for a minute, clutching my glue sticks, and for a second, I actually wanted to start screaming. I wanted to tell everyone in the store that their perfect lives were probably lies. I wanted to tell them that the man they trusted was probably siphoning money into a secret account for some woman in a cottage. But I didn't. I thanked him, paid, and went to my car. I sat there for a while, listening to the AC, and realized I didn't actually want to scream. Screaming is for people who are still surprised. I wasn't. I was waiting. By October, Sarah told me it was time to plant seeds. She wanted me to bring up finances casually, so we had a record of him lying. Ask about the investments, she said. The 401k, everything. If he lies on record, it helps us show a pattern of fraud. I picked a Friday night. The kids were in bed, Wed had dinner, and Mark was reading some report for work on the couch. Hey, Mark, I said. I was looking at some retirement stuff online. I realized I don't really know where we stand. Could we sit down this weekend and go over it, the 401k and whatever else you've set up? He didn't even. Look up, Liv, we've talked about this. I handle the big picture. The 401k is fine. Why are you suddenly worried? I'm not worried, I said. I want to know. He finally looked at me with that look, the one where he thinks I'm spiraling or being too sensitive. You're overthinking it. I've got it under control. Trust me, okay? I do trust you, I lied. I want to see the numbers. Maybe next month, he said, going back to his report. Mim slammed. Let's just drop it. I smiled and nodded. Okay, next month. I went to the bedroom and texted Sarah. He refused. Claimed he was too busy, denied access to the numbers. I started a log, not a diary, didn't care about my feelings, but a record. Friday, Oct. 12, 9:15 p.m., requested financial disclosure. Husband refused. Cited work stress. I recorded every lie, every deflection. The more I wrote, the more I stopped caring. The anger was still there, but it didn't feel hot anymore. I stopped wanting him to love me when he'd kiss my shoulder or tell me I looked pretty. I thought about the JMB Holdings papers. I thought about Nora's curtains and the life he'd built. One evening in late October, I noticed a leak under the kitchen sink. A slow drip, but it had made a puddle in the cabinet. I tried to tighten the valve with a wrench, but the nut was stripped. I stood there for a minute looking at the water. I didn't want to call a plumber, and I didn't want to tell Mark. I didn't feel like dealing with it. I wiped it up with some old towels and put a bucket under it. I could handle a leak. As the holidays got closer, the tension grew, but only for me. To Mark, everything was perfect. He thought he was safe. He had no idea the woman packing his lunches was his biggest problem. I started making some moves with the kids. I didn't tell them anything, obviously, but I started doing more mommy and me stuff. I made sure I was the one talking to their teachers and doctors. I wanted to be seen as the stable parent before everything exploded. I also visited my mom more. She still thought Mark was a rock, and listening to her was torture. You're so lucky, Olivia, she told me over tea. Most women would kill for a husband who provides the way Mark does. I know, Mom, I said. I'm very lucky. I almost showed her the photos of Nora right then. I wanted to yell, look at him, he's a fraud, but I didn't. I smiled and asked for her lemon square recipe. By November, Sarah told me we were ready. Everything was there, the assets were mapped, and the trail was set. All I had to do was serve the papers. Once you do this, there's no going back, she warned me. He's going to react poorly. He likes control, and you're taking it. I'm counting on it, I said. I drove home with the Texas wind hitting the trees. I felt peaceful. For the first time in 12 years, I knew who I was. I wasn't just the stable wife when I pulled in. Mark was in the driveway, washing his car. He looked happy. He looked like a man who thought he'd won. Hey, Liv, he called out, waving a soapy sponge. I was thinking we should do something big for Thanksgiving. Maybe invite the whole family? I feel like we're in a really great place right now. I stopped the car and looked at him. I didn't smile or frown. I realized he was just a man. A small, scared man who had to hide money in shell companies because he couldn't be honest. That sounds like a lovely idea, Mark, I said. I got out of the car and walked toward the house. As I passed him, I saw a smudge of soap on his cheek. I didn't wipe it off. I kept walking, thinking about the folder in Sarah's office. I went inside and started the laundry. I put some towels in and set the timer. I stood there listening to the water fill the drum, and then I realized I'd forgotten to buy detergent. I looked at the empty bottle on the shelf and shrugged. I didn't feel like going back to the store. I let it run.